Welcome back to the deep dive. I have a stack of reports on my desk today that are, well, honestly, they're a little unsettling.
That's putting it mildly.
Usually, when we look at global systems, we're looking at trends, we look at things that shift gradually, over decades. But today, we're going to look at a cliff edge.
A vertical drop.
Exactly. I want to start with a thought experiment.
Hmm?
It is a massive one. I want you to imagine I have a magic wand. And with a single wave of this wand, right now, at this exact second, every single person on Earth stops eating meat.
Total cessation. Just like that. An immediate global halt.
Total. No beef, no poultry, no pork. Effective immediately. The entire industry just stops. Now, I think the average person, and I definitely include myself in this before I really dug into this material, has a bit of a knee-jerk, almost romantic reaction to that scenario.
Oh, absolutely.
We think, okay, wow, instant environmental healing, clear skies, happy animals roaming the fields, a global health revolution.
Right.
That's the dream.
That is the common assumption. It's the utopian view. It is the Disney version of the transition. And look, looking at the data we have here, specifically this comprehensive analysis on global meat cessation, there is truth to the long-term environmental benefits.
The destination is good.
The destination is fantastic in many ways. The science on that is robust. But if you actually model this out, if you look at the mechanics of day 0, day 1, week 1, that is absolutely not what happens.
No, it is messy.
Messy is a massive understatement. It is catastrophic. What you actually get is what the researchers call the core paradox. And this is really the central thesis of our deep dive today.
The core paradox. Okay, lay it out for us.
The paradox is this. A decision that is intended to save the planet and improve human health would, if executed instantly via this magic wand, trigger an immediate catastrophic humanitarian and economic collapse before any of those benefits could even begin to be realized.
We aren't just talking about a bad quarter for the stock market here. This isn't just some market correction.
No. We are talking about a collapse that makes the 2008 financial crisis look like a stumble. We are looking at an immediate economic hole of roughly $1.7 trillion.
1.7 trillion.
Trillion. We are looking at 892 million jobs at risk globally. And, perhaps most terrifyingly, we are looking at a food security crisis that hits the most vulnerable nations on Earth the hardest.
It's the classic, be careful what you wish for scenario, but on a planetary scale. So, here is our roadmap for today. We're going to track this timeline. We're going to start with the absolute chaos of day 0.
The moment the wand is waved.
Exactly. Then we'll move into the struggle of the first few years, what I'm calling the Valley of Death. And finally, we will look at the new world that emerges around year 20. Because, and spoiler alert, the world of year 20 is actually pretty incredible.
It is. It's just the journey there that's the problem.
It is the valley between the status quo and that future that we need to navigate.
And that valley is deep, and it is dangerous.
So let's unpack this. Before we break the system, we need to understand the size of the beast. Why is the meat industry too big to fail without massive consequences? I mean, we see the burgers in the store, but we don't see the infrastructure behind it.
It comes down to scale and interconnection. You cannot just switch this off like a light bulb, because it's not just an industry. It's a foundation of the global economy. Let's start with the hard numbers.
Okay.
The global poultry market alone is valued at $410.98 billion.
410 billion just for poultry, just chickens and turkeys. That's larger than the GDP of many countries.
A lot of countries. And that's just one piece. You add in beef, you add in pork. Total meat production is sitting at 365 million metric tons annually. It's a colossal amount of physical product moving around the globe every single day.
That is a staggering amount of biomass. It's hard to even visualize.
It is. But the real story, the one that defines this crisis, is the people. We mentioned 892 million jobs. That is 26.2% of the worldwide workforce working in the agriculture sector. 1 in 4 working people on the planet are tied into this system. Now, we have to distinguish between the West and the rest of the world here.
How so?
In developed nations like the U.S. or in Europe, livestock accounts for about 30 to 50% of agricultural GDP. It's a huge economic engine. It drives exports, it drives local economies, it's big business.
But in developing nations, it's different. It's not just about GDP numbers on a spreadsheet.
Exactly right. In developing nations, it supports the vast majority of the rural population. For hundreds of millions of people, livestock is their bank account. A cow or a goat is how you store wealth. It is how you survive a bad harvest.
It's a living asset.
It's a living asset. It provides milk, it provides manure for fuel or fertilizer, and eventually, yes, it provides meat. If you delete that entire asset class with a wave of a wand, you aren't just deleting a job. You are deleting the savings account of the global poor. You're wiping out generations of accumulated wealth.
That's a distinction we need to keep in mind throughout this whole timeline. If you are a rancher in Texas, this hurts your portfolio. It's devastating, for sure. But if you are a subsistence farmer in rural Pakistan, this is existential.
Precisely. And the web goes deeper than just the farmer. Think about the processing plants. In the U.S. alone, you have 532,000 workers directly employed in meat processing. In Australia, it's 189,000.
These are often the biggest employers in small rural towns.
The only employer in some cases. But then you have the shadow industries, the industries that exist solely to support meat production.
You mean the stuff we don't think of as meat industries, like the feed?
The feed is the big one. The global feed grain market is $51.7 billion. It's a massive industry in its own right. Take corn in the U.S., for example. A huge percentage of it, something like 36.8% of feed grain, goes directly to animals.
So all those corn farmers in Iowa and Nebraska, their number one customer just vanished.
Vanished. Instantly.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have the logistics. The entire global cold chain refrigerated trucks, refrigerated warehouses, refrigerated shipping containers. That's a multi-billion-dollar infrastructure built around moving perishable meat.
And beyond that?
Veterinary services, an entire branch of medicine dedicated to livestock.
Yeah.
Equipment manufacturing, the companies that build the specialized machinery for farms and processing plants. The whole system is woven together.
So pulling the plug doesn't just empty a supermarket shelf. It effectively dismantles a massive chunk of the global economy. It's like pulling the foundation out of a skyscraper and expecting the top floors to just float there.
That is a very apt analogy.
You can't just remove the cattle and expect the trucking industry or the corn industry to keep functioning as normal. The interdependence is total.
It is. And that brings us to day zero. The first 48 hours after you wave that magic wand. The moment of impact.
Let's do it. Day 0 to day 7, the week of chaos. I wave my wand. Nobody on Earth is buying meat. What happens to the markets?
Absolute freefall. We are talking about a liquidity event unlike anything we've ever seen. Imagine you are a company, a farmer, anyone holding a commodity beef, pork, poultry.
Yeah.
Suddenly, the demand for 365 million metric tons of that product hits absolute zero.
The price must just evaporate.
It collapses. We're talking 70 to 90% within 48 hours. The product becomes effectively worthless. Worse than worthless, actually, because it's now a liability. It's something you have to dispose of.
So if I'm holding stock in Tyson, JBS, or Cargill, my portfolio is incinerated.
You are losing 50 to 80% of your value instantly. The stock market would halt trading for these companies. But it's not just the meat companies, it's the banks. This is where the contagion starts.
Ah, the financial ripple effect.
Banks with agricultural loans face immediate panic because the collateral for those loans, the cattle, the pigs, the future sales, is now worthless. If a bank lent a farmer $1 million against a herd of cattle, and that herd is now worth zero, the bank is insolvent.
And we're talking about thousands of rural banks, community banks, whose entire loan books are tied up in agriculture.
Exactly. You'd see a wave of bank failures across rural America, Brazil, Australia, everywhere. It's a credit crisis that starts in the heartland and spreads outwards.
And then the contagion spreads to the grain markets because nobody is buying the feed.
Precisely. You have demand for 1 billion tons of animal feed vanishing overnight. The futures markets for corn and soy would lock limit down. Trading would likely be halted for days. The entire commodity sector would be in chaos.
Okay, so the screens on Wall Street are red. Absolute panic in the financial world. But out in the real world, out in the feedlots and the barns, there is a much grim reality unfolding. And this is the part of the magic wand scenario people usually forget.
This is the part people don't want to think about.
The animals don't just disappear.
This is the animal welfare crisis.
Yeah.
And it is horrific. We currently have, in the global system, over 1 billion cattle, 1.5 billion pigs, and over 25 billion poultry in various stages of production cycles.
25 billion chickens. That number is just, it's hard to even wrap your head around.
It is. And they are in a system designed for flow. It's a conveyor belt. They are born, raised, and slaughtered on a strict schedule. If you stop the slaughter, the system backs up immediately. The conveyor belt stops.
And you can't just let them go.
You cannot simply release 25 billion domesticated chickens into the wild. It would be an ecological disaster of biblical proportions. They would consume every insect and seed in their path, then starve, or be eaten by predators, leading to a massive spike in pest and predator populations. It would unbalance entire ecosystems.
And you can't keep feeding them because the farmers have no money and the feed companies are insolvent.
Correct. The logistics of feeding that many animals without any revenue is impossible. And then there's the waste. These animals produce something like 10 to 20 million tons of waste daily.
Every single day.
Every day. Without the processing infrastructure or the slaughter cycle to move them out, this becomes an immediate environmental and public health hazard. You have massive lagoons of untreated manure. You have overcrowding in barns. You have immediate and widespread disease outbreaks.
So the irony is that in a scenario designed to save animals, the immediate result is immense suffering.
Unimaginable suffering. It's a logistical nightmare with a deeply tragic core.
So what actually happens? I hate to ask, but what is the practical outcome for those billions of animals?
A cull. There's no other way. A massive government-coordinated cull, likely with military involvement. You'd have to euthanize billions of animals to prevent catastrophic disease spread and starvation. It would be a profound psychological trauma for the farmers, for the public, for everyone involved.
That is a dark image. And meanwhile, the supply chain is just lots.
Like a gridlock. The cold chain, all those refrigerated trucks and warehouses is instantly obsolete. You don't need to refrigerate grain the same way you do beef. So that entire infrastructure is now useless, a stranded asset worth billions.
And the ports, the international trade.
Export markets freeze. Brazil and Australia, which are massive exporters, see their ports descend into total chaos. Ships that are already loaded with meat have nowhere to go. Their cargo is now worthless and rotting. They literally become floating waste hazards that nobody wants.
So that's the first week. Chaos, shock, panic. Now we move into weeks 1 through 12. This is where the initial shock turns into a full-blown crash, and specifically a humanitarian crash.
This is where we see the employment catastrophe really hit home. We mentioned the 892 million workers. Now they are facing immediate and total income loss.
And we need to bust a stereotype here, because I think when people hear meat industry, they imagine a wealthy cattle baron in a big hat.
That exists, but it's a tiny minority. The vast majority of these jobs are not high-paying. The mean annual wage for U.S. meat processing is around $38,000.
$38,000. These are low-income jobs.
Often rural workers, immigrants, people with very limited alternative prospects. If that paycheck stops on Friday, they aren't dipping into their savings on Monday. They are missing rent immediately. They can't buy groceries. The social safety net is not designed for this scale of shock.
And in the developing world, the line between employed and destitute is even thinner.
Much thinner. In a place like rural Pakistan, where 30 to 40% of household income is livestock derived, if that income hits zero, you aren't talking about a recession. You are talking about immediate, widespread poverty. There is no unemployment insurance office to go to in rural Balochistan.
This triggers that agricultural domino effect you hinted at earlier. The feed grain crisis becomes a full-blown agricultural collapse.
Yes. The farmers who grew corn and soy for animals have lost their primary customer. That's about 45% of their total crop production just gone. They are now facing bankruptcy.
But this is where it gets really strange. I want to talk about the fertilizer loop. This was one of the most surprising parts of the research for me. How does stopping meat break the fertilizer industry?
It's a fascinating, if terrifying, feedback loop.
Yeah.
Livestock feed production growing all that corn and soy drives a huge amount of global fertilizer demand. When the demand for feed corn drops by hundreds of millions of tons, the fertilizer industry crashes. Their demand drops about 45%.
Okay, so if fertilizer companies go bust, stock prices plummet.
Yes, but here is the ripple, the really insidious part. Supply chains for fertilizer break down. Production plants shut off. Logistics networks stop running. But we still need fertilizer to grow wheat, carrots, and rice for humans.
Of course.
Suddenly, vegetable farmers, grain farmers, growing for human consumption, they can't get fertilizer. Or if they can, the prices spike because of scarcity and broken supply chains. So, ironically, the act of stopping meat production threatens future crop yields for human food right when we need the most.
So we might actually have trouble growing vegetables because we stop growing cow food. That is the definition of a complex, interconnected system.
Exactly. And then the financial ruin sets in across the board. Farm loans lose their collateral value. Rural banks, the ones that survived the initial shock, now face insolvency. It's a credit crunch that freezes the entire rural economy. You can't get a loan to buy seeds for the next harvest because the bank has failed.
And this leads us to the food security paradox. This was the part of the research that really made me stop and think, because intuitively you think, we feed so much grain to cows. If we give that grain to humans, we solve world hunger instantly.
That is the logic. And in the long term, 5 or 10 years down the road, it is absolutely true. But in the short term, weeks 2 through 12, it creates what the reports call a protein gap.
Why? Why can't we just open the silos and eat the corn?
Because it is cow corn. It's called dent corn. It's hard, it's starchy, and it's been bred specifically for animal stomachs or for industrial processing. You cannot just boil it and serve it to humans like sweet corn.
You'd need a good dentist.
You would. It requires a massive industrial infrastructure to turn it into cornmeal, or high fructose corn syrup, or other additives. That infrastructure doesn't exist at the scale needed to replace meat overnight. So you have silos full of calories that are effectively locked away from human consumption until you can build the factories to process them.
So we have silos full of corn we can't eat and no meat on the shelves.
Precisely. And in developing nations, specifically Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia, livestock provides affordable, nutrient-dense nutrition. You take that away, and you create immediate malnutrition risks. You cannot instantly scale up production of plant-based replacements like lentils or soy for human consumption. It takes seasons to change crops.
And I imagine the demand for those things would skyrocket.
It would, because everyone on the planet suddenly needs plant protein. The price of beans, lentils, and legumes spikes globally. So the poor, who just lost their livelihoods, get priced out of the only food that's left.
So it creates a hunger crisis in the exact moment we are supposedly unlocking more food.
It's the ultimate paradox. More potential food, but more actual hunger.
That is heavy. Okay, let's move forward in time. Months 3 through 12. The struggle to stabilize. The initial shock is over, the shelves are empty of meat, and now governments are panicking.
Panic is the right word, because governments are facing unemployment claims for, at this point, well over 1 billion people when you factor in all the secondary and tertiary industries.
1 billion people. I don't think any government computer system, let alone a national budget, is ready for that kind of number.
None. And this is where the profound inequality of the global system is laid bare. Developed nations, the USA, the EU, Japan, they can print money. They can borrow. They can float their economies with massive stimulus packages like we saw during COVID, but on an even grander scale. They can subsidize the transition.
But Pakistan, India, Nigeria, most of South America.
They cannot. If they try to print that much money, their currency collapses. They face hyperinflation. They face capital flight as investors pull out of their markets. So you have a situation where the global north is on life support, propped up by debt, and the global south is facing total systemic collapse. The disparity in the ability to respond is massive.
And all this time, we are trying to do what the reports called the great repurposing. We have all this land, all this infrastructure that's now for the wrong thing.
Exactly. You have over 1 billion hectares of grazing land that is now economically useless. And you have infrastructure that is fundamentally wrong for the new world. The big question becomes, how do you turn a slaughterhouse into a grain processing plant?
I assume you don't just hose it down and start dumping wheat in.
No. It takes 12 to 24 months of retooling. It requires new machinery, new hygiene protocols, new zoning permits, new worker training. It's a total rebuild. So you have this lost year, or maybe 2 lost years, a period of immense inefficiency where entire logistics networks are being redesigned from cold chain for meat to bulk transport for crops.
And the people, the ranchers, the farmhands, the processors.
They're caught in the retraining lag. A cattle rancher cannot instantly become a coder or a solar technician. There is a profound skill mismatch. And because there is a massive surplus of labor, all these unemployed agricultural workers flooding the market, rural wages are driven down 30 to 40%.
So even if you're lucky enough to find a new job, it pays less.
It pays much less. This is the wage compression the report highlights. So poverty deepens in rural areas even as the government tries to help. It's a very dark, very difficult time.
It is the valley of the shadow of death for the rural economy.
That's a very good way to put it.
Okay, let's push through the darkness. We survived the first year. We survived the lost year. Now we are in years 1 through 5. This is the structural reorganization. The dust is settling. What does the economy look like?
Well, we have taken a massive hit, a direct loss of $1.4 to $1.7 trillion from the global economy. That is about 1.4 to 2% of global GDP. That's a significant global recession, worse than 2008. And the recovery timeline is slow. It takes 3 to 5 years minimum just to get back to the pre-crash level of economic output.
But new things are starting to grow out of the ashes. literally and figuratively.
Yes, absolutely. We see the emergence of a massive plant-based boom. A new $500 billion plus industry in plant protein manufacturing starts to come online. All that capital that was in meat has to go somewhere.
And the technology must be accelerating at a crazy rate.
An incredible rate. We see a tech shift, vertical farming, precision fermentation, automated food processing.
Yeah.
These technologies were niche before the crash. Now they are essential for survival. Capital floods into them, and we probably see a decade's worth of innovation in about 24 months.
And what about all that empty land, the billion hectares of pasture?
That becomes the new frontier. Former pasture land becomes the prime site for renewable energy. We are talking about the potential for over $1 trillion in investment into solar and wind farms on this newly available land. The ranchers who survived the crash are now farming electrons instead of cattle.
Or they're being paid to reforest their land.
Exactly. Carbon credits become a new form of agricultural subsidy. Reforestation becomes a major industry.
There are definite winners and losers here geopolitically too, right? This must redraw the global map of power.
It absolutely redraws the map. Brazil is a big loser in the short term. Their economy is built on meat exports. They lose 80% plus of that market overnight. Their economy is devastated. Australia has to completely restructure its entire rural economy.
And the winners?
Countries with strong plant-based commodities. Places that grow soy, wheat, lentils, and legumes efficiently. The bread baskets of the world become even more powerful. Countries that are leaders in ag tech also gain immense influence.
And the environment, this is what we did it all for, right? When do we start to see the payoff?
This is where the payoff starts to become real. Greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture drop 14 to 18% almost immediately. Methane production from livestock, which is a very potent greenhouse gas, ceases entirely. That is a massive, immediate win for the climate.
But nature doesn't just heal by itself. You can't just leave a pasture alone and expect a forest to pop up.
No. And that is a really important nuance that's often missed. Abandoned land requires active management. If you just walk away from a pasture, you get soil erosion, you get invasive species taking over. In drier climates, you get an increased risk of wildfires because of all the dry scrub.
So we need a new workforce for that.
Exactly. Ecological restoration becomes a major job sector. People are employed to manage the transition of the land back to nature, planting native trees, managing water resources. It's a new kind of farming.
I want to zoom in on specific regions because these global averages can hide a lot of pain and a lot of opportunity. Let's talk about Sub-Saharan Africa again. This seems to be the place most at risk.
It is the most critical region. Yeah. Places like Pakistan, which serves as a good proxy for similar economies in the region, livestock is 15% of GDP. You have 8 million households directly dependent on that income.
So what happens to them in this scenario?
In the first 3 years, they face a very real famine risk. The social safety nets just aren't strong enough to handle this shock. International aid would be stretched to its absolute limit.
Yeah.
But, and this is the crucial part, if they can survive that transition, the region eventually becomes a major plant crop exporter. The potential for agriculture there, with the right investment, is huge, but the transition period is deadly.
And South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh.
The problem there is population density. You have so many people living on the land. The transition is harder because you can't just turn everything into a massive solar farm. People live there. The social dislocation is immense. But again, the long-term opportunity is there. Massive potential for legume and plant protein export if they can navigate the initial economic shock.
In Brazil, you said they were a big loser.
A huge initial loser. But their transformation is perhaps the most dramatic. Brazil goes from being the world's butcher to becoming the world's gardener and energy producer. They have the land, the sun, the water, but a severe 3 to 5 year recession is absolutely guaranteed. It is a painful, brutal reset for their entire national identity.
Okay, we have weathered the storm. We've made it through the valley. We are now looking at Section 7, the aftermath, years 5 to 20, the new equilibrium. What does the world look like 20 years after the yuan was waged?
It looks better, objectively better in almost every measurable way. By year 7, the global economy has finally matched the pre-cessation levels. By year 20, it is significantly more efficient and more resilient.
What about the jobs? What happened to the 892 million who lost everything in week 1?
They have redistributed into the new economy. Our best models suggest about 450 to 500 million are now working in plant-based agriculture. It turns out growing high-quality, diverse crops for humans is actually more labor-intensive than letting cows graze, so that soaks up a lot of the workforce.
So more farmers, but farming different things.
Exactly. Another 200 to 300 million have moved into the new processing, logistics, and ag tech sectors. And a significant number are in that ecological restoration work we talked about.
And food security, the protein gap.
It's closed. And food security is actually improved long-term. A plant-based system is just more efficient thermodynamically.
Yeah.
You lose so much energy when you feed a plant to a cow and then eat the cow. By eating the plants directly, you can support a larger global population with far less land. Malnutrition rates actually drop below pre-crash levels.
And the environment, the big prize.
This is the big win. We are looking at 50 to 100 gigatons of CO2 being sequestered over the next 30 years through the reforestation of former pasture land. That is a massive chunk of our excess carbon. We're talking about a potential 0.3 to 0.5 degrees Celsius reduction in the global temperature trajectory.
That is the difference between a manageable climate change future and an unmanageable catastrophe.
It is exactly that. It's a game changer. And water security improves drastically across the globe because livestock is one of the most water-intensive industries on the planet.
So we arrive at utopia. It sounds pretty good, but we walk through hell to get there.
We did. And we need to talk about the risks because in our timeline, we assume that governments eventually got their act together and coordinated.
Right. Section 8, the nightmare scenario. What if they don't? What if nationalism and protectionism win out?
If governments do not coordinate, if they fall into trade wars, if they don't provide the necessary aid to developing nations, we are looking at 50 to 100 million deaths.
100 million deaths.
From malnutrition, from conflict over resources, from the complete collapse of state services in 5 to 10 developing nations. That is the cost of a chaotic, unmanaged transition. It's a global catastrophe on a scale we've never seen.
And there are other more subtle risks too, right? Even if you have enough calories.
Yes, the B12 and iron crisis. Vitamin B12 primarily comes from animal products. It takes 12 to 24 months to set up the global supply chains for fortification and supplementation on this scale.
So there's a gap.
There's a dangerous gap. In that interim, you have serious maternal health risks and major child development risks. You could have an entire generation with cognitive and developmental issues due to that nutrient gap in the first 2 years if the fortification isn't handled perfectly from day one.
So let's bring this all home. We've seen the chaos of day 0, the pain of the transition, and the promise of year 20. And this brings us back to that core paradox.
The paradox is that the destination year 20 is objectively superior, a cleaner planet, a more efficient food system, better long-term food security. But the journey years 0 to 5 is catastrophic if done as a shock.
It seems like the lesson here isn't about the goal. The goal is good. Almost everyone would agree that a healthier planet is a good goal. It's about the timeline.
Exactly. The final verdict from all this research is this. The difference between a better world and global collapse isn't the what, it's the how.
Oh.
If you do a planned transition over, say, 15 or 20 years, it costs money, maybe $50 to $100 billion a year in global investment and support. But you save the planet and you save the economy.
But if you do the sudden cessation, the magic wand scenario, it costs lives, potentially 50 to 100 million of them. It saves the planet eventually, but it breaks society first.
Precisely. It turns what should be a manageable, albeit difficult, logistical challenge into a full-blown humanitarian disaster.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. I think we often get paralyzed by the size of the problem. We think it's too big to change. But what this body of research shows is that the change is possible and even desirable. But it demands respect for the complexity of the system. You can't just pull the plug.
To rewire the house.
You have to rewire the house while people are still living in it.
That is the challenge of our time.
I want to leave our listeners with a final thought. We've established that the long-term destination is superior. The science is pretty clear on that. So the question becomes, why are we so paralyzed by the short-term cost of starting the transition? Why are we waiting for a magic wand that we know would be a disaster instead of doing the hard, methodical work of the planned transition starting today?
That is the question we all have to answer.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.